Okay, I put a little promotional item on the Facebook page. There is a Facebook page. If you look for Light and Fire, you should find it. And in that promotional item, I threatened to talk about an Ezra Pound poem. And now I'm going to prove to you that I don't make empty threats. So here we go. Pound is notorious in certain respects. He was a very famous anti Semite, um, supporter of Italian fascism. In fact, made radio broadcasts during the war, during World War II, from Italy in support of Mussolini and so on and so forth. Later, he was charged with treason, but was never tried for it. He was declared insane and spent a number of years in St. Elizabeth's Hospital for the Mentally Ill in Washington D.C. I think he got out and had a few years left to him after that. And a number of writers and other poets and artists had been lobbying to have him freed for some time. Hemingway, Archibald MacLeish, people like that, and if you, not discounting or denying the things that he did during the war, but feeling that at a certain point he'd paid for them, and he was a he paid for them. He's a significant poet, and not insane. He was publishing during all that time coherently, and so I'm not sure what the story is. I've never really looked into it and read into it that much about the circumstances, the precise circumstances surrounding his stay at St. Elizabeth's. But anyway, a son of a bitch in some conspicuous ways, and on that account, a figure many people would probably just as soon ignore, maybe even prefer to see canceled, erased, stricken from the canon, and so forth. I have no idea if Pound is taught very much in universities these days. I haven't been connected to any university in a very long time and never as anything but a student. But of course, I do know writers go in and out, and some are found to be objectionable for one thing or another. And some of that is natural and I think healthy, and some of it isn't. Anyway, in the example of Pound, I don't feel he should be canceled or erased or ignored, even stipulating all the personal deficiencies and political deficiencies. I think he's too important a poet for that, too consequential a figure from a very important moment in art and literature. Um, and I don't think even serious character defects, and I suppose I would stop something short of really monstrous character defects, but even serious character defects are a bar to creating great or at least worthwhile art that we should be glad to have. I don't think it's correct to say that the valuing and appreciation of that art excuses or validates any noxious opinions that artists may have had, unless those are evident in the art itself and constructive of its moral universe. I think you can and should appreciate, for example, Shakespeare's Othello, and you can do that without having to look the other way on the racism that's plainly there. Same goes for the anti-Semitism in The Merchant of Venice and the misogyny in The Taming of the Shrew and so forth. And there are, of course, many other examples. I mean, you read Henry James from the something from the 19th century around 1900, and there's going to be casual kind of anti-Semitic cracks made, and that he seems to have agreed with or accepted, and that you're going to see that all over the place. But I think maybe the most difficult case that I know of is the French novelist Céline. He was a loathsome person. He was an out-and-out collaborator with the Nazis in World War II, and wrote some book-length pamphlets that were just vile pieces of anti-Semitism. And yet, at the same time, he wrote a number of very powerful novels, one of which, Journey to the End of the Night, is really, really something, and I think really courageous in its way, and it's just sort of uncompromising and unblinking kind of ability to face very difficult aspects about life, about human existence. And I don't think I can't. It's been a long time since I've read it, but I don't think there's anything specifically anti-Semitic in it. He was that book has a kind of a large tent. He shows himself to be kind of a large tent misanthrope. He kind of hates everybody, but I don't think there's anything specific about Jews in that. But that's a difficult case. I think that's all I'll say on that subject. You can say that you can of course find anti-Semitism, some really indefensible anti-Semitic statements in Eliot, particularly in a book called After Strange Gods. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. We're going to look at a poem by Pound called In Tempore Senectutis. And I came to this poem, which I hadn't known before, because I recently found this very nice edition of his that collects his first two volumes of poetry. And this is, is it New Directions? Yes, it's New Directions. Nice title page, and shows Pound to be quite the man of style of his time. Of Pound's first two books. So the one we're going to be looking at is his poem. It's from his first book, A Lume Spento, and I think that means the extinguished light or something like that. I meant to look that up, but I think that's what it means. And this poem is called In Tempore Senectutis, which I think means in the time of old age. Senectutis, you see the word senescence in there, so it's about old age, senile too. Would seem to come from that. But this book is Pound's first two books, Lume Spento, and then the other one, which is called A Quinzaine for This Yule, came out in 1908 and 1909, respectively. This edition is a 1965 New Directions book that has them both. So this is not a 1908 or 9 book itself, but it's very, very nice, and it's the really only reason that happened. I happened to have found it at the Printers Row Book Fair in Chicago, near where I live, and that is the only reason that I alighted on this poem and why I'm going to do it here. So, so I'll read the poem now. In tempore senectutis, for we are old, and the earth passion dieth. We have watched him die 1,000 times, when he wanes and old wind crieth. For we are old, and passion hath died for us 1,000 times, but we grew never weary. Memory faileth, as the lotus-loved chimes sink into fluttering of wind, but we grow never weary, for we are old. The strange night wonder of your eyes dies not, though passion flieth along the star fields of Arcturus, and is no more unto our hands. My lips are cold, and yet we twain are never weary, and the strange night wonder is upon us. The leaves hold our wonder in their flutterings. The wind fills our mouths with strange words, for our wonder that grows not old. The moth hour of our day is upon us, holding the dawn. There is strange night wonder in our eyes, because the moth hour leadeth the dawn, as a maiden holding her fingers, the rosy, slender fingers of the dawn. He, red spears bore the warrior dawn of old. Strange, love, hast thou forgotten the red spears of the dawn, the pennants of the morning? She, nay, I remember, but now cometh the dawn, and the moth hour together with him, softly, for we are old. Okay. I, sort of had the experience I've had with this poem since I hit on it. I did enjoy that little period of time before I tried to sort of take it apart and see where the ideas were leading and what it was kind of summing to, with the part where because I found it very powerful. I liked the before I had any kind of specific understanding of what was happening here. what kind of anecdote is being related, or what specific ideas and in what specific ways he wants us to think about. And I really enjoyed that little period of time, um, uh, because I think that it's at that moment that you kind of understand the poem in a way better than you will after you've kind of picked it apart, because it is, as I think I've said before, it is about what can't be said. And when the way it sounds or the images it puts in your mind upon a first reading or a first or second don't cohere into anything or gel in any specific kind of way into something coherent, some kind of statement that you can make, um, then that's I mean that's really where it is. That's really you're letting the body of the thing give you this experience uh, that in some ways I sometimes think that the what happens after that is kind of a climb down from it. But anyway, it is definitely worth obviously poking into and doing some noticing. So let's do that. There are 6 stanzas here of irregular length. The shortest is 4 lines. The longest is, I think, 10 lines. And the first, the last 2 stanzas are in this dialogue form. It says he colon, and then in quotations there's what he says, and then there's she, and then a colon, and then there's a quotation, and it's her, and then her statement, the woman's statement. The point of view is speakers here are an elderly couple. Um, for most of the poem, the point of view is really both of them together, both of theirs together. It's kind of fused double point of view, or the shared point of view. And then in the last 2 stanzas of the poem, the point of view splits into it's individuated. It's each of them makes his or her own statement, and it is, as I say, rendered as dialogue. They're talking to each other, and that's a very interesting development in this, I think, and I imagine I'll come back to it. So there's some rhyme here, um, but most of the repeated sounds that we encounter are not rhymes per se, but um, verbatim repetitions, really, of specific words and phrases. And that, plus this kind of incantatory intonation that it has, gives the poem this gravity, kind of gravity of a prayer almost. Um, the speaking voice sounds um, transfixed and suspended in this kind of awed contemplation of strange forces or powers or something uncanny. The word "strange" is one of the recurring words in this poem. Um, the language isn't plain. It certainly doesn't resemble everyday speech, but it's not terribly florid either. There's something kind of stark about it. The um, the repeated elements seem to contain ideas or feelings that are exerting this kind of irresistible magnetism upon the speaking voice or voices. And when they come up, they tend to constellate in specific areas of the poem. Um, when the strange and the night wonder comes up, that's very localized to one stanza, and it comes up again and again and again. And other preoccupations or obsessions, you might say, in here, it happens kind of that way. It moves from uh, one kind of sort of obsessed kind of turning over again and again these ideas again, and then moves on to something else. Though it does gather um, into a whole at the end, I think. Um, the language of motion or change processes or flux is everywhere in this poem. All of it, though, very duly, punctually counterposed by the assertion of some kind of stillness or peace or clarity that can't be exhausted. I think the form of this poem would have been something of a challenge or something unexpected for most readers of poetry at the time. It's not terribly aggressive in its formal innovations, I wouldn't say, for its moment. Again, 1908. But then again, I don't think the reader of the time would have um, I think I should say, I think the reader of the time would have welcomed and found some relief with the rhyme and the other recursive elements that help hold the thing together. And without them, I think the person might have felt sort of pitched into some kind of uncontrollable kind of momentum. The repeated lines, especially for "We Are Old," which occurs a number of times, and it both begins and ends the poem, can help reground the reader after the kind of puzzling surprises of the intervening lines. Um, let's see here. But the rhymes, just to take that specific example, they seem to kind of beat below the surface. There's this it's there, but it's infrequent and irregular. For example, the dieth crieth rhyme in the first stanza with just one intervening line in between them. It's the second and fourth lines of the first stanza. Uh, is then distantly echoed by flieth in the third stanza, and several lines, of course, intervene. And among those lines, there is the word faileth, which is a somewhat near rhyme to those, and you pick it up, but it's kind of a faint pulse. In the same way, cold in the first stanza rhymes with a handful of instances of old, but again, it's kind of far removed from them, so it's kind of distant. So the rhyming is set deeper in the soil, you might say, than readers of the time might have expected. Um, it's more distant from one's senses or awareness than it would have than the readers probably would have been used to. Um, it has more to compete with um, in claiming the reader's attention. And it's features like this, I think, that put us at some distance formally from, say, a figure like Thomas Hardy or Yeats at this point in time. The form seems more open, less regular, less closed, you might say. Its music is more complex, more subtle, more you might just say irregular, perhaps more exploratory or rangy than most of late 19th and early 20th century poetry. It does seem to be probing a little bit past the outer edges of the received forms, and in that way, there is maybe some foreshadowing of what would come in the high modernist movement after World War One, of which Pound, of course, was a very important, very consequential, very influential figure. But this poem still does seem to have a foot or part of a foot, a toe maybe, in prior poetic approaches, even as he is, I think, clearly trying to move past them. So this poem can be seen as a kind of meditation on old age. Um, and it's a very interesting thing from that point of view, and a surprising one, especially for a young man. 1908, the year Lume Spento appeared, Pound turned 23. Um, and I think this is an extraordinary kind of imaginative projection for a young man to make um, about aging and about the reaching of a great age, and um, what that circumstance might be like, what that condition might be like. Um, so at the beginning, it seems, though, like a fairly straightforward portrait of old age as a condition of decline, loss of vitality, etc. But then something unexpected emerges at the end of the first stanza. There's a distinct pivot to a different possibility with the line, but we grew never weary. So I'm going to read that first stanza again. For we are old, and the earth passion dieth. We have watched him die 1,000 times. When he wanes, an old wind crieth. For we are old, and passion hath died for us 1,000 times. But we grew never weary. So I want to pause over that line, but we grew never weary, just for a second here. I think the phrasing of that is worth noting. It seems suggestive to me. In the specific sequence of the words, it reads "grew never weary," as opposed to another thinkable construction, maybe even a more expected one, that is "never grew weary." There may be a suggestion there in saying "grew never weary," that we're talking about, not about something that fails to happen, which could be expressed by never grew weary, but that, some weariness just never comes, but of something that develops, something that's achieved, about the attainment of something like a state of eternal and invincible clarity of consciousness that somehow, amid the physical declines and losses of aging, um, and in the poem, he talks about the dying of earth passions, and I think he's talking about the um, physical losses and declines and so on of aging. That while all that's going on, the couple grew or developed to a condition of this kind of undying vitality or um, undimming clarity, you might say. They seem kind of spellbound by what he calls night wonder, which is that's a term used several times here. The wonder that grows not old, as it's stated in another place. Um, so grew never weary, developed into a never weary condition. I think that's kind of the suggestion, and I think it's a view of old age that um, considerably qualifies or checks the idea that we all probably have. At least is more common of it being, as I say, decline and loss and disintegration and so forth. Um, so and that grows not old. I mean, as it's stated there, as with grows not weary, you have the same construction there. Grows not old. Again, growing into a not old um, condition. So alongside all these usual ideas of decline, there are these things that wane with age, um, physical things usually. There are other things, possibly more important ones, that wax and are ageless and untiring. That seems to be the view here, and I think it's very interesting, and again, very um, interesting, especially considering how young Pound was. So all this develops after this surprising turn at the end of the first stanza. Um, those aspects of aging that we associate with decline and diminishing potency seem to be seen as burdens that are shed, that are kind of sloughed off. Um, so he says, the earth passion, we watched him die 1,000 times. When he wanes, old wind crieth. There's something falling away from them that is maybe the right way isn't to say that isn't that it's decline, but that it's an emancipation of some kind. Something it's transformative. The way that a moth emerges from its prior state as a caterpillar, and the moth trope is also very important in this poem. So in the second stanza, there's a couplet that says, "But we grow never weary, for we are old." And I think there he explicitly connects um, this development into this sort of this clarity um, with age. With age, it seems almost like sort of the keynote of the poem. Those two lines. So let's talk about the moth trope here. It's a recurring trope in the poem. It's one that at first admits of several senses or associations until context narrows the field. You might associate a moth with decay or disintegration. You think of a moth-eaten coat or something like that. But they're also associated with ideas of transformation or rebirth. Every moth starts out as a humble earthbound caterpillar, after all, and then undergoes this amazing metamorphosis. And at one point in the poem, the moth hour of the day is linked, is associated with the dawn, a new dawn, one that's held or sustained by the moth hour. So it's interesting too that the human context here, the frame of the point of view, is not the solitary reflecting mind, but rather the joined consciousness of this couple. Not the individual, but the pairing is the meaningful unit. And then it breaks down at the end into its two constituent and complementary parts, he and she, um, but in dialogue, so that even as we see what's presented as the individual genius of each, we see them as parts of a compound whole. And I should say, when I say genius, I mean it kind of in an older sense, as a sort of distinctive character or spirit, nothing to do with exceeding intelligence or anything like that. Um, so, and I guess you could see their separate points of view. His more sinewy and agonistic, speaking of the old dawn in language characterized by, um, kind of propped up by military tropes, and hers is more pacific and employing the trope of the moth to suggest rebirth. Um, you can see that as representing, respectively, what Pound what it may have thought of as seen as the male and female principles, and you can accept or reject that, the binarism of it, say, or make of it what you will. But the sense of complementarity, I think, is definitely there, and it's only the two of them together um, that make this, that form this this perspective and this state of consciousness, I guess I would say, that enables them to have this kind of transformation. Um, so I'll read the he and the she again. So he, red spears bore the warrior dawn of old. Strange, love, hast thou forgotten the red spears of the dawn, the penance of the morning. So his is, again, it's very sense of conflict or of conquest is there. And then she says, nay, I remember, but now cometh the dawn and the moth hour together with him, softly, for we are old. So he's looking into the past, he's looking into the what they've left behind, and she's noting what's happening in the present and the state that they've attained. Um, and it's probably, let's see here, the red spears of the dawn. He does mention the rosy, slender fingers of the dawn. Often Pound's poems are just clouded with classical references and allusions, and this one not really too much. I only think I only picked up on the one, um, the rosy fingers of the dawn, which is a recurrent trope in Homer. But he mentions the rosy, slender fingers of the dawn, and then he talks about the red spears um, of the dawn. The fingers seem to be transformed in this view into these weapons of war, or and then penance, which are also um, associated with armies and battles and whatnot. And then she comes in from a very different perspective, and um, to represent this strange night wonder that they have been delivered to, and this kind of ability to perceive, or they're kind of, as I say, they're kind of transfixed or spellbound by something about human life and their place in it, or the universe, um, that they have only been able to achieve with age, and which is kind of upends the conventional view of age as decline. There's a real ascent here, and a kind of apotheosis that they achieve. And then the last line of the poem, "For we are old," um, which is a repetition of the first line of the poem, "For we are old," but how transformed our sense of that phrase is from its first enunciation to the last is I think the whole power of this poem. So I think this is really worthwhile, and I would recommend it uh, heartily to you, and any number of other poems in this book. For a very young man, this is a really distinguished piece of work, I think. So I'll read the poem one more time, and we'll be done. In tempore senectutis. For we are old, and the earth passion dieth. We have watched him die 1,000 times. When he wanes, an old wind crieth. For we are old, and passion hath died for us 1,000 times. But we grew never weary. Memory faileth as the lotus love chimes sink into fluttering of wind. But we grow never weary, for we are old. The strange night wonder of your eyes dies not, though passion flieth along the star fields of Arcturus. and is no more unto our hands. My lips are cold, and yet we twain are never weary, and the strange night wonder is upon us. The leaves hold our wonder in their flutterings, the wind fills our mouths with strange words, for our wonder that grows not old. The moth hour of our day is upon us, holding the dawn. There is strange night wonder in our eyes, because the moth hour leadeth the dawn as a maiden holding her fingers, the rosy, slender fingers of the dawn. He, red spears bore the warrior dawn of old. Strange, love, hast thou forgotten the red spears of the dawn, the pennants of the morning? Nay, I remember, but now cometh the dawn, and the moth hour together with him softly, for we are old. Now, I mentioned there was only the one that I saw a classical reference here that you may have heard me say, Arcturus. That's an astronomical reference. Apparently, Arcturus is the largest known red giant star. So he's talking about the star fields of Arcturus, the earth passions that are no more unto our hands. So that's what that is. It's not really a classical reference, unless it's the name is drawn from, and it probably is in some sense. But that's not. It's not an entry in my Oxford Classical Dictionary, which I also got at the copy of at the Printers Row Book Fair many years ago. So another little plug for the Printers Row Book Fair in Chicago that takes place every year. Okay, so that will do it, and I hope, see you next time.